The champagne glass shattered beside my shoes, and a powerful man demanded someone kneel to clean it. Crystal fragments flashed across the black marble floor beneath the chandeliers of the Moretti ballroom. A string quartet played near the frost-clouded windows, its music almost smothered by laughter, clinking silverware, and the low murmur of men who treated every room as if they owned it. I had been working at the mansion for 6 days, long enough to learn that the guests wore tailored wool and carried quiet threats behind their smiles. Long enough to know that Luca Moretti watched everything from the head of the table. Councilman Rizzo stared down at Giuseppe, the elderly cook standing beside a fallen tray of fig pastries. Butter and cinnamon scented the air, but beneath it lingered the sharp bite of spilled champagne. Giuseppe's swollen fingers shook against his white apron. "You ruined a $12,000 jacket," Rizzo said, although only a few amber drops marked his cuff. "Perhaps Moretti hires servants who belong in a shelter." Laughter moved around the table. Thin, polished, cruel. Giuseppe bent slowly, his knees cracking loudly enough for me to hear. He had spent the afternoon working beside a stove hot enough to redden his face, refusing to sit because the pastry course had to be perfect. Now Rizzo nudged a shard of crystal toward him with the toe of his shoe. "Use your hands." I stepped between them. My rubber-soled shoes stopped inches from the broken glass. It was my fault. The quartet faltered for half a beat, then continued. Giuseppe looked up at me, his mouth parting beneath his gray mustache. He knew I had not carried the tray. So did the other servants lining the walls. I bumped his arm when I passed, I said. He dropped it because of me. Rizzo turned his attention to my plain black uniform, then to my face. His gaze moved with the careless entitlement of a man inspecting something he believed could not object. "The new maid," he said. "At least this one understands confession." He lifted his stained cuff. "Come closer and clean it." Heat from the fireplace pressed against one side of my face, while cold air leaked through the tall windows behind me. I could feel every servant watching. I could also feel Luca Moretti's silence. He sat beneath the chandelier with one hand resting beside an untouched glass of bourbon. His charcoal suit was cut with severe precision, and the light sharpened the planes of his face until he seemed carved from the same dark stone beneath us. A woman seated near him had tried twice that evening to touch his sleeve. Both times, he had moved before her fingers landed, subtle enough that no one commented. He did not move now. He did not defend Giuseppe. He did not defend me. Rizzo extended his arm, as if presenting it to a servant at a shoe stand. I took a folded linen napkin from the table, dipped its corner into a water glass, and removed the 3 champagne drops without lowering my head. His smile disappeared first. "You should look ashamed." I admitted responsibility, I said. "Shame requires something more than an accident." A fork clicked against china. Someone inhaled sharply. Giuseppe whispered my name, warning me, but I kept my eyes on Rizzo until he pulled his arm away. My job was worth more than the cash hidden inside my dresser, more than next month's rent, more than the nursing textbooks I had bought secondhand and covered in brown paper. Losing it would close a door I had spent years forcing open. Still, I would not purchase that future with an old man's humiliation. Rizzo turned toward Luca. "Is this how your staff speaks to guests?" Luca rotated his bourbon glass once. I scraped softly against crystal. His expression did not change, but his attention settled on me with a weight I felt between my shoulder blades. "You heard her," he said at last. "She accepted responsibility. It was not a defense. It was a verdict that left the punishment entirely possible." Rizzo gave a satisfied nod. "Then dismiss her." Luca's thumb stopped against the rim of his glass. For several seconds, only the quartet and the fire occupied the room. His eyes remained on mine, waiting perhaps for pleading, apology, or panic. I gave him none. Something changed in his stillness. Not warmth, not mercy, but recognition. "The dinner is getting cold," he said. Rizzo stiffened. "Luca, sit down." The words were quiet enough to make the entire table obey them. I helped Giuseppe stand, then collected the crystal with a brush and pan rather than my bare hands. When I returned to the service corridor, He caught my wrist with trembling fingers. "You may have lost your position. Then let it be mine to lose." Behind a swinging door, chairs shifted and conversation cautiously resumed. I thought the moment had ended. Then the door opened, and Luca appeared alone. The narrow corridor smelled of coffee grounds, copper pans, and hot bread. He kept several feet between us, yet his gaze held mine with an intensity no crowded ballroom had managed to conceal. "Elena," he said, using my name for the first time. His eyes dropped briefly to the hand Giuseppe had released, then returned to my face. "When service ends, come to my study." He walked away before I could answer. Giuseppe crossed himself. I stood beneath the harsh kitchen light, listening to Luca's footsteps fade into the mansion, wondering why a man who had refused to save me had suddenly decided he needed to see me alone. By midnight, freezing rain had silvered the tall windows, and the last departing cars hissed over the gravel below. In Luca's study, the fire had burned down to red seams beneath gray ash, leaving the room cold enough that my damp uniform clung to my shoulders. A cream-colored dismissal order rested on the mahogany desk between us. Councilman Rizzo's signature cut across the bottom in black ink. Luca remained behind the desk, one hand resting beside the paper, his face unreadable in the amber light. "Rizzo will withdraw his support from 2 more Eddie contracts unless you're gone by morning," he said. "And what do you want?" I asked. His thumb tapped the desk once. "I want to know why you confessed to something you didn't do." "Because Giuseppe has worked in that kitchen longer than I've been alive." Rizzo wanted him on his knees. The clock behind me gave a dry metallic click. Luca studied me as though waiting for fear to make my voice smaller. It did not. "Go to your room," he finally said. "I'll decide before breakfast." The unsigned order remained where it was. Hours later, a muted crash pulled me from sleep. The servants' corridor was dark, the stone floor icy beneath my bare feet, but a thin bar of light stretched from the study doorway. I found Luca beside an overturned chair, his white shirt open at the collar and one fist pressed against his chest. A broken tumbler glittered on the carpet. His breaths came too fast, shallow and ragged, while his other hand searched blindly for the desk and missed. "Get out," he said, but the words fractured between breaths. I closed the door behind me instead. He turned sharply, every muscle prepared to fight an enemy that wasn't in the room. "Don't touch me." "I won't." I kept 6 feet between us and lowered myself onto the edge of the rug so I would not tower over him. The air smelled of smoke, whiskey, and a sharp mineral scent of rain blowing through a cracked window. "Look at the brass clock," I said. "Tell me what color it is." His jaw tightened. "Leave." "What color?" His gaze dragged toward the mantel. "Gold." "Good. Now the curtains." "Blue." "The floor under your hand." His fingers spread against the wood. "Cold." "Breathe in while I count to 4. He resisted the first count. On the second, his shoulders lifted unevenly. By the 4th, the violent rhythm began to loosen. I counted again, using the same measured cadence I had practiced in nursing preparation courses, until his back touched the desk and the room stopped closing around him. Only then did I slide the water carafe across the floor. Luca took it without letting our fingers meet. Silence gathered around the ticking clock. "Who taught you that?" he asked. "A nursing instructor." "Who else has seen me like this?" "No one tonight." His eyes hardened. "That wasn't my question." I rose slowly and set the fallen chair upright. "Whatever happened in this room belongs to you. I don't trade another person's humiliation for safety." The words landed harder than an accusation. Luca looked toward the dismissal order, still waiting on his desk, then picked it up and tore it once through Rizzo's signature. He crossed the fireplace and fed both halves into the embers. Orange flame curled through the paper. "At this house, political demands are not ignored," he said. "Staff do not contradict guests, and no one enters this room after midnight." "Then dismiss me." "No." The answer came with enough force to stop the clock inside me. Luca reached for the telephone. When the night steward answered, his voice was steady again. "Elena remains employed. Her wages increase effective immediately, and any instruction concerning her comes through me. If Councilman Rizzo objects, cancel his contracts." A strained murmur came through the receiver. Luca's gaze stayed on mine. That was not a request. He returned the handset to its cradle, sacrificing 2 contracts with the quiet movement of a man locking a door behind himself. You protected Giuseppe because you believed dignity mattered more than your position, he said. Tonight, you protected mine without asking for anything. I kept your confidence. That isn't ownership. Something shifted in his expression, quick and unguarded, before the familiar coldness sealed over it. No, he said, it isn't. Dawn had begun whitening the windows when I turned toward the door. Elena. His voice stopped me, softer now. Why didn't you touch me? I looked back at the distance he had insisted upon and that I had chosen to respect. Because help should never feel like being trapped. Luca's fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. The most feared man in the city had broken his own rules to keep me beneath his roof. And, as I stepped into the corridor, one question followed me through the sleeping mansion. What would he do when distance was no longer enough to make him feel safe? Morning light lay pale across the black marble floor, and the only sound in Luca's study was the slow rasp of an envelope sliding over polished mahogany. Elena looked down at her name, written across the cream paper, in severe black ink. Inside was a cashier's check large enough to cover nursing school, rent, and several years in which she would never have to polish another stranger's silver. Beside it lay the address of an apartment 12 miles from the Moretti mansion. You'll be paid through the end of the year, Lucas said from behind his desk. The room smelled of cedar smoke and bitter coffee, but his cup sat untouched. You can leave today. Elena lifted the check between 2 fingers. Am I being dismissed? No. Then why are you paying me to disappear? A muscle tightened along his jaw. He had changed from the wrinkled shirt she had seen during his panic attack into a charcoal suit sharp enough to resemble armor. Because Rizzo will keep testing my decision. Because this house is not a place for someone planning a respectable future. Those are reasons to warn me. She placed the check back inside the envelope. Not reasons to buy me. Luca's gaze hardened. Take the money. No, that wasn't a negotiation. Elena crossed the cold floor, set the envelope directly in front of him, and pushed it beneath his hand. Until that moment, Luca had controlled every distance between them. The width of the desk, the terms of her employment, the doors she could enter. Now she refused to retreat. You protected my job, she said. That did not purchase the rest of me. His fingers closed around the envelope, crumpling one corner. Be careful. I'm being careful. You're the one pretending this is about my safety. The brass clock on the mantel marked each second with a dry mechanical click. Luca rose. The leather chair rolled backward and struck the bookcase with a muted thud. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then look at me and say you want me gone because I'm a bad maid. His eyes found hers and stayed there. He could silence councilmen with a glance and empty a dining room with one lowered word, yet no answer came. Elena's pulse beat visibly at the base of her throat, but her voice remained level. I have never given myself to anyone, she said. Not because I'm ashamed, and not because I've been waiting for some powerful man to choose me. I made that choice for myself. I will not begin by becoming something a man can reward, relocate, or own. Luca came around the desk, so quickly that the air seemed to tighten. His composure did not vanish into violence. It fractured in smaller, more revealing ways. The loosened breath, the open collar, the hand that reached toward her and stopped inches from her cheek. Heat from the fireplace pressed against one side of Elena's face, while winter light chilled the other. Do you think that's what I want? He asked. I think you don't know what to do with wanting anything you cannot command. The words landed harder than an insult. Luca turned away, bracing both hands on the desk. For 3 years, order had been his refuge. Locked doors, controlled voices, untouched rooms. Elena had crossed none of those boundaries. She had simply stood before them and made him see that he was the one hiding behind them. When he faced her again, the cold mask was gone. If I asked you to stay, he said, would you believe it was an order? Not if you allowed me to refuse. He stepped closer, slowly this time. May I kiss you? The question changed the balance of the room more completely than any threat could have. Elena studied him. the feared man waiting without certainty, his hand still at his side. Then she answered, yes. Luca touched her cheek only after the word left her mouth. His palm was warm, his fingers unsteady. The kiss was brief and careful at first, but years of restraint surged against the discipline holding him still. His breath caught. His other hand closed around the edge of the desk rather than around her. And when Elena placed her palm against his chest, she felt his heart hammering beneath the tailored wool. That's enough, she whispered. Luca stopped immediately. The silence afterward was raw, filled by the soft hiss of burning wood and their uneven breathing. He lowered his hand and stepped back, though every line of his body resisted the movement. Elena picked up the envelope, tore the check cleanly in half, and left the pieces on his desk. If I remain here, I stay as an employee, she said. My future is not yours to finance, and my boundaries are not yours to test. Luca looked at the ruined check, then at the woman who had refused both his money and his authority. Stay, he said, not as a command, but as a request whose answer could cost him. Elena opened the study door and paused in the strip of colder hallway light. I'll stay, but from now on you ask. For the first time in years, Luca Moretti had reached for a woman and discovered that stopping required more strength than taking. Now, they would have to live beneath the same roof, knowing exactly what stood between them, and exactly who controlled whether that distance ever closed again. By sunrise, the photograph had crossed every phone in the Moretti organization. Grainy and silver blue, it showed the study window veiled with winter rain, Luca's hand suspended beside Elena's face, and her mouth pressed to his beneath the amber desk lamp. The image had stolen the question, the permission, and the moment he stepped back. It left only scandal. In the servants' corridor, radiators hissed against the cold, while notifications chimed behind closed doors. Elena stood beside a card of folded linens, the screen of her phone glowing against her steady fingers. New maid Thames Moretti, one caption read. Another called her a calculated innocent who had found the fastest route from the kitchen to the master's bed. Footsteps struck the limestone floor. Victor Salvi approached in a charcoal overcoat, carrying a cream envelope between two gloved fingers. This ends quietly, he said, guiding Elena into the breakfast room without touching her. The air smelled of burnt espresso and beeswax. Great daylight sharpened every edge of the untouched silverware. Victor placed the envelope on the table. Inside were a cashier's check and a non-disclosure agreement. The amount would have paid for nursing school twice. Sign, leave by the service gate, and say the photograph was misleading. Elena looked at the blank line, waiting for her name. Misleading how? You misunderstood Mr. Moretti's attention. I didn't. Victor's jaw tightened. Then say nothing at all. Elena pushed the papers back. Silence bought under threat is still a lie. The door opened behind him. Luca entered without a coat, his white shirt open at the collar, the knuckles of one hand pressed against the doorframe. His gaze dropped to the check. Who authorized that? Victor did not turn. I'm containing damage. By paying her to carry it. Luca crossed the room and tore the agreement once, slowly, the paper making a dry sound in the stillness. Get out. Victor took the check, but left the torn contract on the table. Before passing Luca, he lowered his voice. The capos are waiting. They already think she has her leash. His footsteps faded into the marble hall. Luca faced Elena across the long table. You don't have to go. It was not an order, but the mansion itself seemed to speak around him. The locked gates, the armed men beyond the windows, the quiet machinery of protection that belonged entirely to his world. Elena untied her black apron and folded it into a precise square. If I stay today, every door you open for me will look like payment for that photograph. Let them look. You can afford their contempt. She placed the apron beside the ruined agreement. I can't build a nursing career beneath rumors that I traded myself for protection. Luca reached toward her suitcase when she lifted it, then stopped before his fingers touched the handle. Where will you go? Somewhere my choices still sound like mine. Snow blew through the open front doors in thin white threads as Elena crossed the foyer. She did not use the service entrance Victor had chosen for her. She walked down the center staircase, past the guards and the Moretti crest carved in a black stone, then out through the same doors reserved for Luca's most powerful guests. No one escorted her. No one dismissed her. By the time the gates closed, her footprints were already disappearing beneath fresh snow. 2 hours later, cigar smoke hung beneath the coffered ceiling of Luca's council room. 6 capos sat around the walnut table while the photograph glowed on a wall-mounted screen. One tapped the image with the stem of his glasses. 3 years without so much as a rumor, and a maid breaks the discipline of Luca Moretti. A low laugh moved around the table. Another man leaned back, leather creaking beneath him. Rizzo loses contracts because she speaks. Now she walks out while every newspaper calls her your weakness. What happens when our enemies learn all they need is a pretty face and an apron. Luca remained standing at the head of the table. The room was warm, yet melting snow still darkened the shoulders of his jacket. Choose your next words carefully. There it is, the oldest capo said. Not denial. Protection. The laughter stopped, but the insult remained in their eyes. They expected Luca to erase Elena publicly, to call her a liar, an opportunist, anything that would restore the old distance between the boss and everyone beneath him. Instead, he removed the photograph from the screen and placed his phone face down. She asked me to stop, he said. I stopped. She chose to leave. No one in this organization will rewrite either fact to protect my reputation. Chairs shifted. A cigar was crushed hard into crystal. One capo rose, then another, each man leaving without the customary nod. Luca did not call them back. When the final door closed, 6 untouched glasses remained around the table, and the silence no longer belonged to obedience. Elena had surrendered her job rather than sell her truth. Luca had kept that truth and watched the first cracks spread through the power that had once made every room bow. Freezing rain rattled the windows of the South Ward Community Clinic, and the fluorescent lights buzzed above plastic chairs that smelled of bleach and wet wool. 3 nights after leaving the Moretti mansion, Elena was helping with intake forms when a young woman in a silver nightclub dress slid a pay envelope across the counter. Her wrists bore no wounds, only 2 faded admission stamps and the pressure marks of a bracelet removed too quickly. The envelope listed charges for transportation, housing, uniforms, security, and a conduct penalty. After 82 hours of work, the balance showed that she owed the club $340. They kept my driver's license, the woman whispered. Mr. Salvi says I can have it back when the debt is cleared. Elena recognized the embossed black crest at the top of the statement. The club belonged to Moretti. Victor Salvi's approval code appeared beneath every deduction. Elena did not promise rescue. She asked permission, photographed the document, and spent the next 48 hours listening. For more women produced matching statements. One had screenshots ordering managers to keep debts active. Another had a recording of Victor instructing security to threaten anyone who contacted police. Their wages moved through separate companies, but every transfer ended at the same Moretti-controlled account. Shortly before midnight, Elena stood again before the mansion's iron gates. Wind drove needles of rain against her coat. The security lamps turned the wet gravel white. The guards did not reach for the intercom when they recognized her. Tell Luca I brought him something more expensive than my silence. 10 minutes later, cedar smoke and old leather filled the study where she had once returned his check. Luca stood behind the mahogany desk, his jacket discarded, the sleeves of his black shirt rolled to his forearms. For one unguarded second, the sight of her broke the stillness in his face. His fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. Then Victor stepped from the shadows near the fireplace. You resigned, he said. That means you no longer enter this house without permission. Elena placed a thick folder beneath the green-shaded lamp. The women in your clubs don't have permission to leave. Paper scraped softly across wood. Luca opened the first statement, then the second. The clock behind him ticked with mechanical precision while rain hissed against the glass. Victor barely glanced at the pages. Fabricated. She wants leverage after refusing the agreement. Elena unlocked her phone and played the recording. Victor's voice filled the study, smooth and unmistakable. Keep the balances negative, hold their identification, and move the cash before monthly review. The fire popped. Luca did not look at Elena. How many clubs? 7 that I could verify, she answered. Possibly more. Victor moved toward the desk. Luca raised one hand, stopping him without a word. He called the organization's overnight accountant, read aloud a routing number from the evidence, and asked where it ended. The answer came through the speaker after several keyboard clicks. Moretti Entertainment Holdings. 46% of the Empire's winter cash flow. Victor's mouth hardened. Those clubs carry the legitimate businesses. Shut them down and payroll collapses. Vendors walk. Men who have stood beside you for 20 years will choose another table. And if they remain open? Luca asked. Elena met his eyes. Then every boundary you respected with me was theater. You stopped when one woman said no, but you kept earning money from women Victor made afraid to say it. The words landed without volume. Luca crossed the room so quickly that Victor stepped aside, yet he did not approach Elena. He went to the wall safe, entered the code, and removed the club ledgers. Heavy books struck the desk one after another, releasing the dry smell of ink and dust. He then took Victor's authorization key from a locked drawer and snapped its security seal. Your access is suspended until I finish reading. Victor's face changed, not with surprise, but calculation. You would risk everything because a former maid walked in carrying photocopies? Elena gathered none of the papers. She left them between the two men like a blade. Neither could pretend not to see. No, he'll risk everything only if he decides those women count when nobody is watching. Luca looked at her then, and the control that had survived mockery, betrayal, and 3 untouched years faltered in a quieter place. She had returned with no uniform, no paycheck, and no reason to protect him from the answer. Elena moved toward the door, the damp hem of her coat whispering across the rug. The first club opens at 6, she said. At 6:01, I take copies to the district attorney unless those doors stay closed. Behind her, Victor inhaled sharply. Luca remained beside the ledgers, one hand resting on the empire that had made him untouchable. Outside, the rain turned to ice, and dawn was less than 6 hours away. By 5:30, the iron gates of every Moretti club were chained beneath a sky the color of gunmetal. Neon signs flickered against wet pavement, delivery trucks idled in the freezing dark, and bass from an unfinished sound check died with a single pull of a breaker. Inside the mansion, Luca stood at the end of the council table with 6 phones arranged before him. Close every location, he said. Cancel tonight's bookings. Freeze the debt accounts. Return every worker's identification before noon. Victor's voice cracked through the speaker. You'll destroy half our winter revenue. Luca watched the digital clock change to 5:42. Then half our revenue should never have existed. He authorized the orders himself, each encrypted signature severing another artery of Moretti Entertainment Holdings. Managers protested. Vendors demanded penalties. 2 allied families withdrew their protection from Moretti's shipments before sunrise. By 6, the clubs remained dark. By 6:01, nearly 48% of Luca's monthly income had vanished from the ledgers. The council room smelled of cold coffee and hot printer toner as the capos rose one by one, their chairs scraping across marble. No one offered the customary nod. One paused beside Luca and dropped an alliance contract in the fireplace. Orange flame curled through the Moretti seal. Luca did not reach for it. Across town, Elena watched the same club workers emerge through locked glass doors carrying purses, coats, and envelopes containing the identification Victor's managers had withheld. The young club worker who had first shown her the fraudulent pay statement pressed her license against her chest. Snow collected in her hair. For the first time, no guard ordered her back inside. Luca had answered the deadline, but Elena knew closed doors could be reopened once the city stopped looking. At 9 that morning, she entered the district attorney's public intake office, carrying the evidence beneath her coat. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Melting snow darkened the shoulders of her wool sleeves. An investigator offered her a confidential statement, and promised to remove her name from the initial filing. Elena looked through the glass wall at Luca, who had arrived without bodyguards and remained in the corridor because she had not invited him inside. "If my name is hidden," she said, "Victor will call these women liars who don't exist." The investigator lowered his pen. "Public testimony will bring press attention. Your employer, your school, everyone will know." Elena placed her nursing scholarship letter beside the recordings. The award prohibited recipients from becoming involved in unresolved criminal proceedings that might expose the program to reputational risk. She had spent 4 years earning every prerequisite at night, counting tips and folding uniforms beneath anatomy textbooks. The paper felt soft along its creases from being opened too many times. Luca entered only when she gestured to him. "My attorneys can protect your identity," he said. "No." Elena slid the confidentiality form back and signed. "You paid for silence around these clubs long enough. You don't get to buy mine, even to protect me." At noon, cameras crowded the courthouse steps. Wind snapped against microphone cables, and exhaust hung bitter in the air. Elena walked to the podium alone. She gave her full name, described the withheld identification and fabricated debts, and submitted the women's statements for investigation. "Nobody. No more Eddie protection." Luca remained 20 feet behind her, close enough to intervene and finally disciplined enough not to. Before she finished, an email appeared on her phone. The scholarship committee had suspended her award pending review. Elena read it once, then forwarded it to the investigator as evidence of the cost witnesses were expected to absorb. She returned to the microphones and completed every sentence. By evening, subpoenas had reached the club managers. Banks had frozen Moretti entertainment accounts, and 3 remaining allies had abandoned Luca. The mansion felt cavernous when Elena returned to collect the last of her documents. Bare branches scratched the windows, and the extinguished fireplace left the council room smelling of ash. Luca stood where his capos had deserted him. Spread across the table were canceled contracts, foreclosure notices, and figures showing an empire bleeding faster than it could be repaired. Elena placed the scholarship email beside them. His hand moved toward hers, then stopped inches away. 3 years of refusing human contact had taught him how to turn distance into armor. Elena's choice had made that distance feel less like control and more like cowardice. "You should have kept your future," he said. "Those women had futures too." Her voice remained steady, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "I made my choice. Don't insult it by wishing I hadn't." Luca lowered his hand. Outside, another vehicle departed through the gates, taking another ally with it. "There was someone else," he said, each word rougher than the last. Elena did not move. Luca stared at the untouched space between them. 3 years ago, a woman asked me for help. The clock sounded once in the empty hall, and I chose my power. The clock's brass pendulum cut through the silence with a dry, mechanical click, while cold air pressed against the tall windows and dimmed their edges with frost. Somewhere beyond the empty hall, a radiator knocked inside the walls. Elena watched Luca cross to the unlit study, not with the measured stride he used before his capos, but with one hand dragging along the walnut paneling as though the house had shifted beneath him. He unlocked the door and switched on a single green-shaded lamp. Amber light spread across the leather desk, catching dust in the air and the silver grip of the pistol beside his ledger. Luca removed the weapon first. He opened a drawer, locked it inside, then placed the key before Elena. "Her name was Teresa," he said. Elena remained near the doorway, her coat still buttoned, the scholarship papers tucked inside her bag. Luca opened the wall safe and took out an old black phone sealed in a clear evidence sleeve. A crack split its screen from corner to corner. She worked at one of our first clubs. Victor wasn't running them then. Another man was. His thumb rested against the plastic without touching the glass. Teresa found out he was keeping identification cards and using debts to trap women. She came here because she believed my name meant I could stop him. Rain began tapping the windows, soft at first, then hard enough to blur the lights beyond the iron gates. Lucas set the phone on the desk and pressed its damaged power button through the sleeve. The battery had long since died, but a small recorder beside it held the transferred message. Teresa's voice emerged beneath a wash of static. She spoke quickly, struggling to keep her breath even. She said men had followed her. She said she had names, statements, proof. Then she asked Luca to meet her before midnight. The message ended with 6 words. Please don't make me face them alone. Luca stopped the recording. The silence afterward felt heavier than the gun locked inside the drawer. What did you do? Elena asked. Nothing. He did not hide behind the desk. A rival family was waiting for me to show weakness. If I moved against one of my own men because a club worker accused him, the capos would have called me soft. I told myself I needed one night to secure their loyalty. His fingers closed around the edge of the desk until the leather blotter wrinkled beneath them. She was found the next morning. The official report called it an accident. Elena walked forward and switched the recorder on again. Teresa's plea filled the room a second time. Luca flinched, but Elena did not lower the volume. No, she said when he reached toward it. You kept this for 3 years. Listen to what you kept. The static hissed between every frightened breath. Luca stood beneath the green lamp until the message ended by itself. Afterward, I punished the man responsible, he said. Quietly. I paid her family. I shut down that club and made yourself the hero of a story where you arrived too late. Elena's voice stayed level. I made sure no one could accuse me of weakness again, including you. Luca's practiced stillness finally broke. He turned away, knocking the safe door with his shoulder. Metal struck plaster with a hollow clang. Every time someone came close, I heard that message. Every hand felt like something I had no right to take. So I stopped touching anyone. 3 years. No affection. No comfort. Nothing that could let me pretend I was still a man capable of either. Elena stepped around the desk, but she did not touch him. She took the key he had placed before her and set it beside the dead phone instead. Then I arrived. You looked at me without asking what my name could buy you. His breathing roughened. You saw me unable to breathe and gave me help without turning it into a debt. When I tried to pay for distance, you refused. When I kissed you, you made me ask. And when you said stop, I stopped. His eyes lifted to hers. I thought losing control meant wanting you after years of wanting no one. Rainwater streamed down the glass behind him, bending the garden lights into trembling gold. But desire wasn't what frightened me. You made me want to believe one decent choice could erase the choice that killed her. Elena picked up the recorder and placed it in his hand. The movement forced him to accept its weight. I am not Teresa, she said, and I am not your absolution. Luca's hand shook around the recorder. I know. Do you? Elena moved his chair away from the desk and turned it toward the bare center of the room, stripping away the barrier, the ledgers, and the symbols of command. Because closing those clubs was not a gift to me. It was a debt you owed women whose names you never bothered to learn. Luca sat only after she pointed to the chair. For once, the master of the Moretti mansion waited for instruction. Elena remained standing. Say what happened without telling me what you did afterward. His jaw tightened. Outside, thunder rolled low across the frozen grounds. She asked me to protect her, he said. I protected my authority instead. She died because the men around me understood that my power mattered more to me than her life. The words left no room for mythology. No rival family. No code. No excuse. Elena took her bag from her shoulder and placed it on the floor, but the distance between them remained untouched. Now you know why I came back, she said. Not to tempt you. Not to save you. I came back because a man who can stop when one woman sets a boundary must answer for profiting when others are denied the same right. Luca looked down at Teresa's recorder in his palm. A tear struck the cracked plastic, and he made no attempt to wipe it away. Elena reached the doorway, then stopped beneath its cold brass frame. If you want me beside you when the next price comes due, don't ask whether I forgive you. Her gaze held his across the stripped, silent room. Show me what you choose when the thing you have to sacrifice is no longer money. Freezing rain hissed against the black windows, and the mansion's brass door had barely closed behind Elena when a dark sedan rolled soundlessly from beneath the bare elms. White headlights washed over the gravel. Victor Salvi stepped out, his overcoat buttoned to the throat, one hand hidden inside the pocket. "Luca wants you taken to the clinic," he said. Elena stopped 3 feet from the rear door. Victor's smile never reached his eyes. "Get in, or Giuseppe pays for your courage." The threat was quiet enough to vanish beneath the rain. Elena entered without resistance. But as Victor slid in beside her, she pressed the voice recorder on her phone through the canvas of her bag. 20 minutes later, the sedan descended into the loading bay of a shuttered Moretti nightclub. Cold neon leaked through the wet windshield. Inside, stale liquor and industrial bleach clung to the air. Victor fastened a plastic restraint around Elena's wrists and seated her beneath the dead glow of a red exit sign. Then he called Luca, "Reopen every club, restore my accounts," and announced that the maid fabricated her evidence. Luca's voice came through the speaker, controlled and low. "Let her walk out." Victor glanced at Elena. "You have 40 minutes. At the mansion, Luca stood alone in the stripped study, Teresa's cracked recorder beside his phone. Across the desk lay the Empire's master ledgers, shell companies, club ownership records, offshore transfers, protection payments, every signature that had kept the Moretti name beyond lawful reach. Restoring Victor would preserve what remained. Refusing him without another move would leave Elena in the hands of a man with nothing left to lose. Luca dialed the district attorney's emergency number. "This is Luca Moretti. I'm offering complete financial records and sworn cooperation in exchange for immediate action at one of my properties." The assistant district attorney warned him that the files could support racketeering charges against him, asset seizure, and years in federal prison. Luca opened the encrypted archive. "I understand." One keystroke sent decades of power into government custody. In the nightclub, Victor's phone vibrated. His accounts had not been restored. They had been frozen under emergency order. The color drained from his face. Elena watched him pace across sticky black tile, while bass speakers clicked softly as they cooled. "You built the debts," she said. "You kept their identification. You made women work until numbers you invented were paid." Victor turned toward her. "Luca approved every dollar that reached his companies. But you designed it." His jaw tightened. "I designed what kept his clubs alive. I took their papers because frightened girls run. I buried their wages and fees because debt makes better chains than locks." Inside Elena's bag, the recorder captured every word. Victor stepped closer and demanded her phone. Elena kicked the bag beneath the bar, beyond his reach, then drove the legs of her chair backward into a service panel. She had noticed its loose steel edge when he brought her in. The plastic around her wrist scraped against the exposed corner once, twice, then split. Victor lunged. Elena shoved the chair between them and struck the red emergency release bar beside the loading corridor. A siren tore through the building. Steel fire doors dropped from the ceiling, cutting Victor off as white security lights flooded the hallway. Elena seized her bag and ran through the service exit into freezing rain. Unmarked vehicles were already turning across the lot, their tires spraying silver water. Luca's disclosure had given prosecutors the club addresses, security codes, and Victor's likely refuge. Elena's recording had given them his confession. Victor reached the outer door seconds later and found officers waiting on the other side. Luca arrived without bodyguards, his coat open to the wind. He stopped when Elena emerged beyond the flashing lights, breathing hard but standing on her own. He did not reach for her. "It's done," he said. "All of it. Every ledger. Every account. Every name, including mine." Elena removed the phone from her bag and held up the recording. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then federal agents entered the Moretti mansion before dawn, sealed the study, and carried Luca's empire away in numbered boxes. By sunrise, the gates no longer belonged to him. His accounts were inaccessible, and a summons waited on the bare mahogany desk. Elena had escaped Victor's chains. Luca had finally chosen before another woman had to die. But when the courthouse opened, he would have to discover whether a man stripped of power could still stand by that choice. Morning light lay thin and silver across the empty Moretti house, catching dust in the air where chandeliers once threw gold over crowded tables. Somewhere beyond the boarded windows, a delivery truck groaned down the wet street. its tires whispering over pavement still dark from the night's rain. Elena paused outside the study, one hand resting on the cold brass doorknob. The house no longer smelled of cigars, expensive liquor, and polished wood. It smelled of cardboard, old paper, and the faint mineral dampness rising through the stone walls. Luca stood by the bare mahogany desk in a plain charcoal coat, with no guards behind him and no ring of keys at his belt. The federal seal had been removed from the door that morning, but the room still looked borrowed, as if even the walls were waiting for him to leave. "You came," he said. His voice was quieter than she remembered. Elena stepped inside, carrying no suitcase, no uniform, and no expectation. "Victor was convicted yesterday," she said. "The recording was accepted. The workers were cleared of the debts he invented. My name was cleared too." Luca lowered his eyes to the empty desk. "Good." He said nothing about the money he had lost, the properties frozen under court order, or the men who once called him boss and now refused to meet his gaze. Those facts waited in every silent room. Tomorrow, he would stand before a judge and answer for the empire whose records he had surrendered. There would be no private arrangement left to protect him, no hidden account, no loyal capo able to turn a locked door into an escape. Elena noticed the small paper cup beside him, untouched and cold. "Are you afraid?" she asked. A muscle moved along his jaw. "Yes." The answer came without armor. "But I'm not asking you to make that easier." For a moment, only rain tapped against the tall windows. Elena walked farther into the study and looked at the shelves stripped of ledgers. The spaces where power had once been stored were now pale rectangles beneath the dust. "You won't be there as my employer," she said. "I know, and I won't be there as your maid." "I know that too." She faced him. "If you want anything from me, Luca, you ask. You don't assume. You don't pay. You don't protect me by deciding what I'm allowed to know." His hands remained at his sides. "May I touch you?" The question moved through the room more sharply than any command he had ever given. Elena watched his face, the tired hollows beneath his eyes, the restraint in his fingers, the way he waited without stepping closer. Then she crossed the distance herself. Her palms settled against his cheek. His skin was warm, but the rest of him stayed perfectly still, as though one careless movement might turn permission into possession. She leaned forward and kissed him, gently and without fear. Luca did not seize her. He answered only after she pressed closer, one hand lifting to rest at her shoulder, light enough for her to move away. She did not. Instead, she placed her forehead against his, and the breath he released broke unevenly between them. "I'm not your absolution," she whispered. "I know. Closing those clubs paid an old debt. It didn't erase what happened." His eyes shut. "I know. Then what are you asking for?" Luca opened his eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, there was no command waiting behind them. "Nothing I'm owed," he said. "Only the chance to become someone who can be chosen." The words seemed to cost him more than the empire. Elena drew back half a step. Beyond the windows, the courthouse clock began to strike, each note traveling through the hollow house. Luca looked toward the sound, then back at her. He would go alone. He would tell the truth. He would accept whatever freedom, wealth, and years the court decided to take. Elena understood that loving him could not mean carrying him through that judgment. So she kept her hand on his face and made the only promise that belonged entirely to her. "Then go," she said. "Face it. And if you come back as that man, not the one who owned this house, but the one who chose the truth, I'll decide what happens next." Luca nodded. He tried to hold himself together, but the control that had sealed him shut for 3 years finally gave way. No shout came. No dramatic collapse. Just one tear slipping down his cheek, then another falling onto Elena's hand like the first drops after a long winter. She pulled him into her arms. This time, he held her only when she wrapped herself around him, his face pressed against her shoulder, his breath shaking through the fabric of her coat. The empty house heard him weep. It heard no order, no threat, no bargain, only the sound of man surrendering the last part of himself that power had taught him to hide. Elena stayed until the courthouse bell stopped ringing, and when Luca finally lifted his head, he did not ask her to wait, promise, or forgive him. He simply walked beside her toward the open door, leaving the house behind as a place they had survived, not a place either of them belonged to. That morning, Luca did not lose control to desire or violence. He lost it to the freedom of being loved by a woman who could leave and chose to stay.